Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 203 of Humanity Rising. I want to welcome all of you today in the spirit of springtime. I can feel with my body that spring is surging around us, and I just want us to appreciate the eros, the generativity of nature and the earth, even though the pandemic is still with us, even though we're challenged on a day-by-day basis with all kinds of crises and obstacles, things we need to deal with in a time-urgent fashion. It's a beautiful thing as we approach the spring equinox to feel the earth alive around us, to feel love surging in our cells, and to feel that we are alive at an incredible moment in human history where everything depends on us. At a point where the scientists are telling us we're running out of time to solve our problems. Humanity is rising. And it's been a great honor over these past months for Ubiquity University and over 350 partners from all over the world to come together and on a daily basis just honor human goodness, honor human creativity, honor human resilience as we come together in community to navigate the extraordinary challenges that have beset us with the COVID-19 pandemic. We want to contemplate today the offering of our world religions to enabling us to come together with Mother Earth in a more heartful, synergistic, and embodied way. We've discussed the world religions quite often over the course of our various 200 plus sessions. Arguably, our religions, both as systems of spiritual thought and being, but also as institutions, are the most powerful, enduring institutions in history and in the world. We often think of the corporations or the nation states as wielding the most power. And in some ways they do. But in the end, corporations, nations, empires, even civilizations have risen and fallen. And our religion, our traditions have endured. In this spirit, I want to welcome Bob Rees, who's been with us before. He's convened other panels. As you may remember, he's a visiting professor and director of Mormon studies at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. He's taught at UC Berkeley, UC Santa Cruz, other major universities around the world. And in addition to being a scholar and a poet, he's also the chairman of a foundation that delivers assistance, humanitarian aid to disadvantaged children in the developing world. So Bob, I want to welcome you, and Bob will initiate our opening meditation. Thank you, Bob. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Jim, and welcome to everyone who has taken time to join us in this session today. We'd like to begin, as Humanity Rising does every day, with a meditation. This day's meditation is on the beauty of the natural world, which is, and if we think about it, a gift unlike any other gift in the known universe. And as we begin, I want you to listen to the words of the American poet Robinson Jeffers, who said, "It is only a little planet, but how beautiful it is." And we know that the enormous and vulnerable beauty of things is the face of God. To live gladly in his presence and to die without grief or fear, knowing it survives us. This is God's will. He works, he grows and changes. Is it not by his high superfluousness we know our God? For to equal a need is natural, animal, mineral. But to fling rainbows over the rain and beauty above the moon, beauty above the moon, and secret rainbows on the domes of deep seashells. You can move more quickly, Rick. There's the beauty of the moon, and then this incredible thing of rainbows on the domes of deep seashells. And as Jeffers writes, not even the weeds to multiply without blossom. Nor the birds without music. Then Jeffers says, look how beautiful are all the things that he does. His signature is the beauty of things. So a brief meditation on natural beauty, remembering one of the images you've just seen or recalling your own memory of some time when you were immersed in our beautiful world. Breathe that beauty into your heart, that feeling of being in the presence of beauty. Breathe that image and feeling into your heart with a 5-second in-breath. And that same feeling of beauty on a 5-second out-breath into the world. Just breathe in and out rhythmically for a minute or so. I'll strike the bowl to begin, and then again after a minute or so, do it again. Beauty in and beauty out. If you find your mind wandering, just come back to some beautiful image or sense that you had in nature. Breathing that in and letting it go out into the world. Beauty in and beauty out. Thank you. I was someplace not too long ago looking at some wonder in nature and thought that it's possible that this beauty may not be here for children and grandchildren and future generations to see. So preserving the beauty of the world. I think it was Dostoevsky who said that in beauty is the salvation of the world. In the last session of the Vanishing Garden, I mentioned that I had the pleasure of leading 2 groups of distinguished American writers to China in the 1980s. The first group included writers such as Toni Morrison Maxine Hong Kingston and Gary Snyder. The second group included, among others, the American naturalist Barry Lopez. I fell in love with Barry and his beautiful writing when I read his Arctic Dreams, a hauntingly beautiful book about that northern landscape that won the National Book Award for Nonfiction in 1986. I wrote to Barry shortly after our last session in December to ask him if he would participate in a future session. He gracefully declined, saying that his life had developed a Jobian cast, referring to the biblical character of Job, a reference to his battle with cancer and sadly to his having lost much of his property and possessions, including his 50-year personal archive of his writings in one of the fires that swept through Oregon last fall. And yet, typical of Barry's optimistic nature, he wrote that he and his wife Deborah were rebuilding, repairing, and replanting. I was shocked only a few weeks later to find that Barry had passed away on Christmas Day. In a tribute to him published in the Salt Lake Tribune, I wrote, Barry Lopez was one of the most intelligent, informed, and urgent voices over the past 40 years, calling us to repent of our destruction and devastation of the earth. His was an impassioned, poetic plea for us to come to our senses. My favorite of Lopez's many powerful essays is The Passing Wisdom of Birds from his collection, Crossing Open Ground. In it, Lopez chronicles an event that took place 5 centuries ago this coming June, when Hernando Cortez, seeking revenge against the Aztec Emperor Montezuma's earlier defeat of the Spaniards, marched into Tenochtitlan, the Aztec Byzantium, known today as Mexico City, a city which Charles V called the most beautiful city in the world. Having been driven out of the city a year earlier, Cortez returned with a larger army composed mostly of indigenous soldiers he had recruited for this purpose. And with vindictive violence, as Lopez reports, Cortez laid siege to the city, canal by canal, garden by garden, home by home. And in an ultimate act of barbarity, Cortez set fire to the great aviaries and to the nests of wild birds found throughout that great city. Lopez writes, the image I carry of Cortez setting fire to the aviaries in Mexico City that June day in 1521 is an image I cannot rid myself of. It stands in my mind for a fundamental lapse of wisdom, an underlying trouble in which political conquest, personal greed, revenge, and national pride outweigh what is innocent, beautiful, serene, and defenseless, the birds. Indeed, he adds, one could argue the same oblivious irreverence is still with us among those who would ravage and poison the earth to sustain the economic growth of Western societies. The question before us, before humanity today, is the one posed by Lopez at the end of his essay. Is it possible to move beyond a moment in the Valley of Mexico when we behaved as though we were insane? Again, is it possible to move beyond a moment in the Valley of Mexico when we behaved as though we were insane? Lopez's answer can be found in Arctic Dreams, in which he wrote, staring down peccata mundi, the sins of the world, that day on the tundra, the image of God was an effort to love in spite of everything
that contradicts that impulse. He said, when I think of the phrase, the love of God, I think of the great and beautiful complexity we hold within us, this pattern of light and emotion we call God, and that the rare, pure ferocity of our love sent anywhere in that direction is worth all the mistakes we endure to practice it. Today, we are blessed to have three people who hold that pattern of light and emotion in their hearts and minds, and who exemplify the love Lopez talks about in their passion for saving and restoring this beautiful world. Nana Furman, a native of Indonesia living in California, worked with the World Wildlife Fund in her native country of Indonesia. She's a member of Green Mosque Committee for the Islamic Society of North America. And recently, she organized the Islamic Declaration on Global Climate Change and co-funded the Global Muslim Climate Network, which calls on all Muslim nations to transition from fossil fuels to clean energy based on development and clean energy-based development. In 2015, Nana was named the White House Champion of Change for Climate Faith Leaders. She is an LEAD Fellow on Green Economy and currently is the Muslim Outreach Director for Green Faith, the Global Faith and Spiritual Environment Action Network. Gopal Patel is co-founder and director of Bhumi Global, a nonprofit organization that works to educate and mobilize Hindu communities globally for environmental action. He has been an environmental activist, campaigner, and consultant for over 10 years, working in India, East Africa, Europe, and North America. A recognized global leader in the religious environment movement, Gopal has been honored for his work by Prince Philip in Buckingham Palace, spoken at the White House, and currently serves as an advisor on religion and sustainable development to the United Nations. Born and raised in England, he currently lives with his wife in New York City. Catherine Whitecloud of the Wippazoka Dakota Oyate lives her life as a mother, grandmother, and holder of the sacred knowledge shared by her ancestors. Through her grandmother, great-grandmother, parents, and teachers who have graced her path in life, her greatest passion is to ensure that the language and teachings of our ancestors are shared and carried forward to live and thrive through the youth of today. A strong advocate for children and families, Catherine's message reinforces that without our children, we have no tomorrow. Catherine is an educated counselor and leader and knowledge holder and keeper, gifted with the healing knowledge of our ancestors and the necessity of caring for our Mother Earth. We will hear from each of these specialists in this order, Nana, Gopal, and Catherine, and afterwards we will have a group conversation based on their presentations. Nana, it's now yours.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Humanity Rising, for inviting me. This is truly an honor. As mentioned, this is a passionate thing for me to do this kind of work. It's not just a work, but I think like I do it because it's also part of my faith, and also because where I come from. So please allow me to share my screen. So I wanted to give a little bit background why I do what I do and why I actually fall into this path. I call it like fall into this path because I didn't realize, and I think I've never planned myself to be on this journey. So as mentioned, I came from Indonesia, which is the other side of the world from North America, and also we are located in the three major Earth, crust that colliding on different plates. So we are very prone to earthquakes and other disaster. However, we are very blessed that we have many in our surrounding, this beautiful volcanoes, majestic and elastic green rainforest, exotic species, just to name a few, the fauna, the flora around us, and also this series of paddy rice field, just like, a carpet that, being spread out on the land, and pointed roof traditional homes, close-knit communities, and the home of the Komodo dragon, and with more than 17,000 islands spread out like the emerald necklace, and thousands of miles, beautiful beaches, and amazing underwater lives. We are in Indonesia is one of the mega biodiversity countries, even though we are not in land base, we are only like 1% of the world land surface, because we are in the archipelagic country. So 70% of our country is water, the ocean, but we actually hold one of the richest biodiversity in the world. So I grew up with that. That's where I came from. And I grew up with that. I just took everything for granted. And as a Muslim born and raised in Indonesia, I understand the prophetic saying that the earth is green and sweet, and God has appointed us human as stewards over it to take care of it. So I thought the whole world, growing up, I thought the whole world is just like that, green and beautiful. But then years later, I learned about ecological footprints. Even though these are just numbers and graphics, somehow when I was attending that presentation, I wept. I wept because I understand what we're doing. We are actually killing our planet. So I learned what is ecological footprint, which is the measure of how much land and resources that we need as human being, as well as a city or a community. But then we also have biocapacity, that our earth has a capacity on how much they can produce in a set of time, and generate to produce, to continue their production. However, we use more than our earth can replenish in time. So that's when the unsustainability occurs, when the ecological footprint exceeds our the earth biocapacity. And even worse, when I'm actually trained as an urban designer, so I design cities, I plan cities. And in 2007, when 50% of the world population actually lived in the cities, and now we already have 55% of the world population living in the cities around the world. And it's going, it's just counting, and predicted by 2050 is going to be 68% of the world population is going to live in the cities. Why is it alarming? Because, like it or not, the people in the city consume more than than the earth can replenish. And then we know that, maybe for those of you, I included myself, grew up and lived in the cities, so we tend to not really think where things come from. However, so this is just one of the example for agriculture production. For example, we need a lot of land, but we don't have that much land surface for us to actually cultivate our food production and other agriculture production. So as we go along, I learned that actually we are at this point consuming more than one Earth's resources. That means that we are actually taking the resources from the future generation. And that's, for me, that is not right, because what are we leaving to our future generations, to our children, our grandchildren, and the future generation, like, is this like the kind of earth that we're living them, like that we already, consume everything, and they like live them in, in this bankrupt ecological condition to their future. And then I looked up in my Islamic teaching in the Holy Quran that God asked us to walk gently on this earth, meaning that when we live in this earth, we're not living this, high ecological footprint, like pollution, waste everywhere, and then just, living all the mountain of garbage as our, as we live our lives. So we have to live very lightly, and also in the path of the future wise people, where they really living in harmony with nature. On the other hand, I'm also involved in learning about climate change after I watched the Inconvenient Truth by Vice President Al Gore at that time. So I was even more shocked because of that. First, I was shocked because of the ecological footprint, and then the climate change as the consequences of our way of living. So then, we learned that climate change impacts is going to impact in our lives. Just like the increase of a little temperature is going to impact our food resources, our water supplies, and our ecosystem, and also the disaster that we are facing. And we face this disaster just recently in the United States. We saw it, what happened in Texas, that everything just shut down and collapsed for a moment, that nobody could do anything. So that kind of disaster happened more and more and more frequent and more severe lately, and they all related to somehow the condition of our weather pattern. So then our living condition is going to be impacted from our food supply, our water supply, and as well as our health. We are still in the pandemic now, so we already a year of that experience. So then also climate change, it says, like the scientists said, that it's going to be the biggest global health challenge for our time. Besides that, also with the sea level rise from the consequences of climate change, that's going to be a lot of countries who are located in the small islands are going to lose their homes. And this is the example. Maldives is predicted as the first country to be disappear from the face of the planet because of the sea level rise. And then because of that, we're going to have a lot of refugees, a lot of people lose their homes, that they have to migrate to other places. And that's going to create another social and political disruption as well. And as it is right now, we're like, as a human society in this world, we're not ready for that. On top of that, we are going to face this. But then the Holy Quran, God reminded us that corruption has appeared in the land and the sea, that our own hands, human hands, have earned. Like, we are the one who's making all this disruption, that we may taste what we've done, so that we may return to our senses. So that's, I think, these powerful verses always remind me every time I see like disaster or something, destruction into our ecosystems. And for us, in terms of, if we're talking about climate crisis, we need to really reduce our global emission. But as it is now, this is a very important year. Like yesterday, we were having this multi-faith day of climate action, just to call the governments, because this year they're supposed to come up with their commitments, how much emission they're going to reduce based on the Paris Accord in 2015. But as it is, government, taking COVID-19 as their excuse not to meet their commitments. So then if we look at all these environmental problems that we face daily, globally, locally, or even in our region, then we should ask ourselves, is global crisis and climate change as well actually a moral and spiritual crisis? I would say yes. All this time we always talk about ecosystem or climate negotiation from the scientific point of view based on research, and I'm not against that. I'm fully support of all the climate science, and also like from political perspective, who's going to do what, how much I'm going to reduce, how much I'm going to invest, and then also like the business sectors. But how about us, the people of spirits, the faith communities? We have our duty to, because this is our moral and spiritual crisis also. So like it or not, we are as humanity as the brink of this. It's the end of the road. Where are we going? Are we going to the right, to the left? Are we going to jump off the cliff? Where are we going? So I go back to my own tradition, reminding me that the first verse that was revealed to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is called Iqra bismi rabbika ladzi khalaq. I recite it in Arabic. That means like recite in the name of your Lord. Iqra itself in Arabic language literally means to read, but to read what? To observe, to read the verses in the Holy Book, the scripture, the Quran. The verses in the Arabic word is called ayat, but ayat also means another thing, which is signs in nature, the signs of God in nature. I'm very glad from the poem that Bob recited earlier that all the signatures of our Creator in nature, exactly that ayat is also meaning the signs in nature. So I always have this question to my Muslim sisters and brothers. Imagine if somebody were to say, I'm going to erase one verse in the Holy Quran, one ayat. Imagine like what would be the reaction of Muslim around the world. That's going to be like, probably like a lot of protests and so on and so forth. But how come we never having the same reaction when one species extinct from the face of the planet? That is also one ayat, one verse, one sign of God in nature. So this is like my kind of like reminder all the time why I'm doing what I'm doing. So I don't differentiate like between like, oh, this is my work or this is my way of life. For me, like worship and nature is kind of blend in, because what I'm doing actually protecting the environment, trying to maintain the environment in the good condition. It's part of protecting the signs of God. So that means I'm also doing my worship to my Creator. And there's like more than 800 verses in the Holy Quran actually mention about nature and environment, whereas approximately like 150 verses talking about law, about how to do things, what we call fiqh, which is the law in the Islamic law. But then most of us, like Muslim, including me, focus on what's the do's and the don'ts, then and so on and so forth. But we actually kind of like ignore the 800 verses, which is like more than 150 verses about nature and environment and our responsibility to the surrounding nature around us. So this prophetic tradition also that I put here in the slides is a reminder what is really the essential in our lives. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that there's three things that cannot be denied to each person: water, pastures, and fire. And if we translate it into our current context, water is water, pastures is how we are, our cultivating land, like our agriculture, our food supplies, and fire is energy. Where do we get our energy supply? So those are three things that are essential to our humankind. However, we are facing this water crisis around the world, and then our global usage of water is still immense. But then we cannot live without water. No living being can't live without water because every living thing is come from water. And also water, like a lot of polluted water and also wasting water. We don't realize that, like water is very scarce actually in this world today. But then we use water without even consideration. But we are being reminded by the prophet that, like, for Muslim, we pray 5 times a day. And before we pray, we make our ablution, wudu in Arabic. And even when we make our ablution, which is required before we pray, he said, don't waste water when you make your wudu, even when you are in the running stream. Whereas like today, our homes have running streams, running water in if you live in the developed world, also like developing world, like, we have access to water unless you live really in the very remote area. So then, like this is a reminder that even for worship, we cannot waste water. So how about for our, everyday life? So, and then water is, I think like this is shared also in many faiths, that water is a blessing and also a purification. And then, like, speaking of water, because of the scarcity of water, then we also have this issue of food scarcity, the droughts, for example, that happens due to the climate-induced drought. Then we see like this failed crops that happens around the world. And on the other hand, we have a lot of people still don't have access to food. That's the world hunger is a serious thing. But the other hand, the ironic of it, we have tons of food waste that people just wasted, be it in the developed world as well as developing world. They have like different way of wasting food, but it's still considered food waste. But then we are reminded that we have to count our blessings, that everything is provided around us, meaning that we should eat locally and in season, not to, go overboard for something that, like probably using a lot of energy to just transport our food from one point to another point. And also
none of this is Bob. Could you kind of tie it up in a minute or so?
Yeah. Yes. So then, okay, I'm just going to go fast here. There's some, okay. So I think this is what I'm going to share. Oh, this one. Bob mentioned about rebuild, repair, and replanting. And for waste, like, because again, like in the beginning, I mentioned about we use a lot of resources, consumption. I think like this picture has to be in our mindset now. We need to rethink before we do everything. And I'm going to close with this because a reminder that, hold on, yes, this one. So I mentioned about the worship and taking care of the planet. The prophet said that the earth has been made a mosque, a masjid, and meaning that we can pray everywhere as Muslim. We don't need to go to the mosque because the earth is a mosque. So if we're taking care of our mosque, we maintain the cleanliness and everything, why don't we maintain our earth? Because this earth is our mosque. This earth is where we pray. This earth is where we worship. And my last message is this one. I think this is going to be related very closely with Gopal and also with Sister Catherine from the indigenous tradition, that this earth is our mother. the prophet said that preserve this earth because this is our mother. And in the Islamic tradition, when somebody asks him, who should we respect first in our lives? He said, your mother. And then that person asked again, who else? He said, your mother. And then who else? He said, your mother. And then the fourth time he said, your father. So if we have to respect our mother, our biological mother, 3 times, how about our own, this earth? Everybody's mother. So I think I would like to close with that. I'm looking forward for the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nana. Beautiful presentation. Gopal, you're next.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bob, and to all the organizers for having me with all of you today. It's a real pleasure and honor. I want to start with a very short Sanskrit invocatory prayer. Om Gyan Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Jakshuram Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. The prayer I just chanted is fitting, I think, for today. In Hinduism, there are a number of important teachings which I will be talking about in this presentation. But the prayer I just chanted does 2 things. It thanks our forefathers, our ancestors, our teachers, and our gurus for the work that they have done to pass wisdom and religious teachings on through generations. So it's a prayer of thanks to our ancestors. And it's also a prayer to ask them to lead us to the light, to lead us to the truth, to find out what is the essence of this world, to find out what is our purpose and our role in the world that we inhabit. And that's a really important point, because I would say one of the starting points of Hinduism is that there is no certainty. I think the 2 certainties that Hinduism would talk about is that our birth and death. And I think we can maybe add a third one, which is taxes in the modern context. So Hinduism says that there are no certainties. And this starts from God, him or herself. There's a beautiful prayer in the Rig Veda where it talks about even God doesn't know what is the purpose of creation. Even God may not even know why we are here. There may not even be a God. And I'll just read the final couple of lines from this prayer in the Rig Veda. It says, where has this creation arisen? Who has performed it? The one who looks down on it in the highest heaven, only he knows, or perhaps he does not know. Even only he knows, or perhaps he does not know. So right at the beginning of Hinduism, in the Rig Veda, which is one of the oldest Hindu texts, there's this sense of not knowing. And so therefore we have to search for truth. We have to search for the essence of what is right, what is a good life, and what is the purpose of our life. And for that reason, there's not a singular Hindu narrative when it talks about the environment, or there's not a singular Hindu way about talking about the world. There are many different ways. In Hinduism, you'll have monotheists, you'll have polytheists, you'll have atheists, you'll have people of different theistic traditions all living together harmoniously within the family of Hindu traditions. And so therefore, from that, you get a variety of perspectives, and I want to talk a little bit about those today. The first is just talking about how we view nature and the interconnection between nature and the divine. There's one narrative or one school of thought that says nature is in God, that in the birds, in the trees and the plants and the animals and the aquatics, you will see God, you will see a divinity within all forms of life. In the Bhagavad Gita, this is known as Samadarshana, that a learned person with equal vision will recognize the equality of all life, recognizing there's no higher or lower, there's no superiority. Spiritually, we are all equals amongst ourselves. And then because of that, we should respect all life, because if I'm not higher or lower, I'm living in a family with every other life form on the planet, and therefore we have to treat all life with love and respect. And then there's another school of thought, and these are complementary. It's not like these are mutually exclusive, is that the first one I mentioned is understanding that God is in nature. The second one is that God is nature. And there are verses and teachings in Hinduism that would support that. For example, it says in the Bhagavad Purana, it says that the rivers are the veins on the body of God, the trees are his hairs, the air is his breath. In the Mahabharata, another famous Hindu text, it says that the mountains are his bones and the earth are his flesh, the sea is his blood, the sky is his abdomen, the sun and the moon are his eyes, the sky is his head, the earth is our feet, the directions are his hands. And so you have this dual kind of not competing, but complementary narratives, one that God is in everything, and then one that God is everything. And they are very distinct. And you'll have some Hindus who believe in one and some who believe in another, and some that will see that these are very complementary to each other. And that's the view that I personally take. And so because of that, it can be a little bit difficult to know what to do, because we like certainty. We like being told what to do. We like being told, do this, do this, do this. And so Hinduism, what it does, it doesn't advocate for certain practices, but it advocates to lead a life based on certain principles. Because things change, we change, the world changes, and certain practices can be outdated, certain practices can be very, very relevant, and then other times they can be seen as not necessarily or antiquated. And so it's the principles which are at the heart that drive Hinduism forward and has driven it forward for thousands of years, and that I feel very strongly lead themselves towards strong environmental action, not just for Hindus, but for all people who are concerned about restoring balance and harmony to the world. And I want to talk a little bit about those today. Again, going back to the Vedic text and the Rig Veda specifically, there's this one really great idea it starts with, which is that the world is a cosmic machine, and that in this cosmic machine there is there is balance. It's like a machine which is very finely calibrated. And as we know, in any complex machine, soon as one little thing goes out of order, the whole machine goes out of order. And so Hinduism says that because the world is so finely balanced, everything is in equilibrium, everything works, if left alone to its own devices, everything works perfectly, right? But what's that one thing that can cause disruption in this cosmic machine? It's the free will that humans have, right? And so because of our free will, our desire to enjoy, our desire to exploit, our desire to help and serve and be good, or to be bad and destructive, we need to have these guardrails of these principles to ensure that we're not disruptive to the balance of the world. And so that's where we get certain teachings, which I'm sure people on this webinar are familiar with, teachings of maybe ahimsa, of being non-violent in the world or reducing violence, the teachings of sattva, that means to be good, to be wholesome, to be supportive, the concept of seva, which means to serve and to assist and to help other people, the concept of satya, which means the pursuit of truth and to live in a truthful way. But one teaching which I really believe grounds all of those together, and it may be one that again is familiar with everyone here today, is a concept of dharma. Dharma is like a framework, I would say, which is not just found in Hinduism, but is found in different ways within all the Indic traditions, from Sikhism to Jainism to Buddhism. And Dharma really, as I said, it's a framework because it holds so much. Again, if we go back to the Mahabharata, Dharma is said to be that which upholds or sustains the natural order. So if we go back to this analogy of the machine, we have to maintain that balance. And Dharma is the container that allows us to do that. Now, Dharma is complex. I'm not going to go into too many details, but I do want to share a little bit, because I think it is important when we're talking about how do we act in a way to restore balance and harmony. And we talk about theories of change in our activism work, and I would say a Hindu theory of change is to restore Dharma to the world. Now, there's a beautiful story in the Bhagavad Purana where the earth takes the form of a cow. And the cow is very dark. She's very sad. She's abused. She's beaten. She's unhappy. And Dharma takes the form of a bull. And the bull, as any other animal, or quadruped, has 4 legs, because there are 4 legs of Dharma. There are 4 legs to sustain the world. But unfortunately, in this instance, 3 of the legs of Dharma have been destroyed or ripped apart from the bull. And so therefore the bull is only walking on 1 leg. Now the 4 legs of Dharma, again, I'm going to run through these quickly and we can share with them afterwards. The 4 legs of Dharma are of moderation, of cleanliness, of compassion, and truthfulness. I'll say those again: of moderation, of cleanliness, of mercy, and truthfulness. And the bull in this current age, the legs of Dharma have been destroyed, where only the leg of truthfulness is standing. And so when these legs are restored, what happens in the story, the legs are restored to the bull, so the Dharma stands on his own feet again, the earth is rehabilitated and rejuvenated and is happy again. So straight from the Hindu text, the Bhagavad Purana, we have this story that the earth suffers when Dharma is not upheld. And Dharma is good action, good behavior, to live again with moderation, to live with cleanliness, to live with compassion, and to live with truthfulness. When we live by those values individually and collectively, Hinduism suggests the earth is happy. And we can see the parallels to our current environmental crisis through these values and principles. We are not living in moderation anymore. As Nana said, we are living out of moderation. We need 3 planets to sustain ourselves if everyone lives according to Western lifestyles. We are not compassionate amongst other people. You know, we live in a very self-centered, individualistic lifestyle where it's all about us and what we can get. And the sense of compassion and caring for others, being our brother's keeper, is so much in decline. And as we all know, truth is under assault from all sides. It's the post-truth age. And so that's why we really believe in the work we do at Bhumi Global, and that we really try to promote with our Hindu partners and other partners globally, is that, as Nana was saying, the root solution to the environmental crisis is a spiritual solution. And as Hindus, we have one focus, and as Muslims will have another focus, and as Buddhists will have a focus, and Jews will have a focus. The focus and the emphasis will be different, but essentially it's all coming to the same truth, is that a renewal, a revival of the spirit is what is needed to renew and revive the spirit of our planet Earth, our only home. I want to end with one very final note, which is that in the context of the pandemic, we put out the Hindu Declaration on Climate Change in 2015, and we said in there very clearly that the health of our human family is reflective of the health of the planet. As the planet becomes more sick, as she becomes more sick, we will become more sick, and it becomes a deadly, toxic downward spiral. And so there's so much need to restore health and abundance to the natural world if we want health and abundance for us as humans. And I'll end with a final quote. This is from the Durga Saptashati, and I think it sums up exactly what we're talking about today. It says that so long as the earth, Mother Earth, is able to maintain mountains, forests, and trees, until then, the human race and progeny will be able to survive. So our very survival depends on protecting and restoring the natural world. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to the conversation at the end.
Thank you, Gopal, very much. And Catherine, time is yours.
Good morning, and thank you very much to all of you, to Mitakuye Wasim. In our language, that means all our relatives and all our relations. And that is the context within which I will be sharing the knowledge that I carry that has been passed on to me through those who have taught me, but as well through my ancestors and the blood knowledge that I carry. In the context of the sacred garden that we're talking about, we must remember that we are of the land and we are nothing without the land. And without land, there is no us. There's a higher purpose in our existence. And as human beings, we fail to understand that higher purpose and what it means, because we live in a world that is very much egotistical and is ego-driven. We do not look at our higher purpose or our purpose of why we're here. And what is that purpose? We understand completely as Indigenous peoples what our purpose is. It's embedded within our ancestral languages. It's embedded within our knowledge that was passed on to us. And it's embedded within our Mother, the Earth, and what she teaches us. Our first responsibility is to be good relative. That is an understanding that many people they don't understand it. What does it mean to be a good relative? We learn this as Indigenous peoples from a very, very early age. In fact, in utero, when we are taught by our mothers and our grandmothers, and we now understand through scientific knowledge that indeed the fetus does hear man while being carried within mother, that we learn all of this about our responsibilities in life while being carried in utero and forward into life until we go through our coming of age ceremonies that we practice and that we live by. Our first responsibility is to be good relative. We are the last in the order of creation. Man was created last. Therefore, we have a responsibility to everything and for everything that was created before us. The land, the water, the animals, the trees, the fauna, everything was created so that we could have a good life, a good, healthy life that would bring us happiness through all that was provided for us. So in our prayers and our acknowledgements, we always use the term Mitakria Owas'i, which means we are all related. Our definition of relative is related to all that is living. We are the last order in creation. Therefore, we are the smallest in creation. We have the least power. Everything above us has much more. Everything created before us actually has more control over what our life is going to be than we think that we have. Mother Earth is in charge. She is the leading living being that influences the bringing forth of new life. We see it in the seasons. We see it especially in spring. We see it through women bringing forth life. We see it through the cleansing of women every month, and we call it moon time because it happens on the cycle of the moon. So life comes forth not because of our own design, it's because Mother, the Earth, and creation is guiding and controlling that. She also shows us when we've gone too far in inflicting pain and damage to her, and she lets us know. She lets us know through what you see throughout the world today: earthquakes, volcanoes, fire, droughts, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes. She shows us time and time again that she's in charge. We have no control over any of that. The richest man in the world with all his private aircraft was grounded because of a volcano. He could not fly. He had no control over that. The wildfires in northern Alberta and where the oil patch is brought a message about the damage that the oil industry was doing to the land. Brought wildfires that tore everything apart, that burnt everything. But still, government and man does not listen to that message that nature brought. And so we will continue on this path of destruction, which is what we have contributed, what we have done to Mother Earth. We've allowed it. We are part of the fabric of human beings. And when we continue to allow it, then we are giving up on the life of our grandchildren and those yet unborn. And that is something that I, as a grandmother, can never ever do, is give up on the life of my grandchildren. It's my primary responsibility in life to ensure that they have a good life. The earth is changing, so must we, in the simplest and most profound ways. And this change is one of personal choice and personal commitment. What am I going to do to help the earth, to make it healthier for my grandchildren to live a good life? Currently, there are more than 1 million plant and animal species that face extinction. More domestic animals in the world than there is wildlife. That again is all man's doing. The arrogance of man. The arrogance of man who says that they can give designation to a river that they are a human being. Man doesn't have that right. That's only our Creator that does. And those were all created before us. So there was life there before we ever came to be. Our ancestral knowledge is embedded in our language. We must support and participate in the revitalization of all of our languages, especially our indigenous languages. The language is connected to our land, to the land, and to place. My language, Dakota, is connected to all of the Americas, the central plains of the Americas. We are connected intimately to all of those places, our spiritual places. We're connected to the water, and we're connected to all the animals. And we feel it greatly. We feel it greatly through our health, the imbalance in land, the imbalance in earth. Our people are suffering from illnesses that my ancestors never ever experienced. The rampant cancer that is affecting our children and our people. That is because of the sickness of the earth, and it's created by man. It's not anything that Mother Earth has put here for us. It again is created through arrogance and through economy, where man thinks that they can supersede natural law. And that is absolutely not possible. We are placed here for purpose in our own areas where we were born, where our ancestors come from. As I mentioned earlier, before we came online, I am not a Canadian or an American. I am a citizen of Turtle Island, or a citizen of what is commonly referred to as North America. We do not believe in boundaries. Those boundaries were not created by nature and by our Creator. They were created by man, and therefore really hold no value when it comes to Mother Nature and all that she provides for us and does for us. It is critical that there be recognition and support for ancestral knowledge of our people, all Indigenous peoples, for an alliance with scientific knowledge, respecting each other and cooperatively providing solutions. The knowledge that we have as Indigenous peoples was passed on to us by our ancestors tell us when change is happening. Our star knowledge tells us when change is coming, especially in weather and in what's happening to the earth. She shows us, and all we have to do is look up and see, and we are told what is coming. It is critical that we face the crisis we're now in, that we have in part contributed to, and it is our wake-up call, and has been for at least 3 decades, and yet we continue to turn a blind eye until we have reached this point. We've reached this point where we all pay for water, something I could never imagine when I was a child, because I drew water from the well where I lived with my grandmother. We lived right off the land. We could pick. We had all our sustenance that we needed came from the land. We lived simply. We had no electricity. We lived in log homes. We lived with sod on the roof for insulation. And we were happy. And we had everything we needed to thrive. We didn't need all that you see in the world today. In 2010, Canada hosted the G20 summit. And in the lead up to the G20 summit, there is a World Religion Summit that is held. And I participated in that World Religion Summit. And at that summit, we shared the knowledge of our ancestors and saying that great change is coming, and Mother Earth is showing us that the damage we've inflicted on her has reached a point where she is going to show us that she's in control. 3 days later, when the G20 summit was going to begin, there was an earthquake in the area where the summit was being convened, an area where there had never been an earthquake before. Her message was not heeded, nor did they even listen or acknowledge why that earthquake happened, or the fact that it had happened in an area that had never happened before. Man's arrogance, political arrogance. Personal responsibility. We all have personal responsibility, and our health and wellness is achieved by following our life path, our purpose in life. Knowing our purpose gives us strength and inspiration to live, to take care of ourselves, and to follow our dream, so that our families and our children and our communities can be happy. So the importance of meaning and purpose, we're not just here for ourselves. We have a purpose, and we have to figure out what that is, and we have to fulfill it. To not do so is not to live our life completely. We have to live our values, which are spiritual, and our natural laws, which we hear long before there was ever anything else, before man created man-made laws. We are responsible individually for our actions every day. How are we going to contribute to the well-being, first of all, for ourselves, for our families and community, but also for the well-being of our mother, the earth, and all those that live within it? The spirit within each of our beings carries innate knowledge of the moral and ethical principles of what should be the basis of our human conduct. We understand these principles as spiritual and natural laws. Each action we take carries a consequence, positive or negative, depending on whether or not we follow spiritual and natural laws. When we behave according to positive values, our behavior is noted by the greater intelligence of the universe. Positive thought and action works to align us with the forces of spirit and nature. The opposite is true when we behave in keeping with negative values, when we're not respectful, when we're not loving, if we're dishonest, if we're not giving, if we're not kind. It means we've allowed the experiences of our lives to affect our responsibilities. It's much like a child. A child doesn't know hatred. A child doesn't know or understand racism. A child only knows good until the influences of its environment impacts its way of thought and seeing the world. The spirit and nature do not align with us, rather will act in opposition to us when we are behaving in negative manners. In truth, we create our own destiny through our behavior, and that is what my brother and sister also spoke of. We create our own destiny through our behavior. This is not to say we should blame ourselves for everything negative that befalls us as individuals or as a people. There are greater forces in effect that we as human beings do not have the capacity to understand. The Creator has a greater plan in which we are only given a small role in which to learn from. Often, there is a greater plan or teaching in effect in what seems like a negative situation. The right question to ask should be, what can I learn from this situation? There is a teaching in every experience that we encounter. Our experiences of trauma and genocide as a people should serve as an opportunity to show the world our true spirit and our resilience as a people who've endured and persevered with our beautiful values and way of life intact as it was given from the beginning, despite what has happened to us. And in transcending our suffering, we're healing our spirit and following our values, spiritual and natural laws. We can teach the world great lessons how one can survive terrible trauma, rebuild and flourish again, including the terrible trauma that we are inflicting on our mother, the earth, who provides all life for us. Spiritual laws are the original instructions that were given embedded into everything that is alive, that has a spirit. It was embedded by our Creator, and the Creator put its own spirit into us. So when the first human being was created, that human being was created with a knowledge of all the Creator's laws and original instructions that govern us and all of the universe. So there's a great binding law that we believe in, and it's the spiritual law that binds all of creation and the whole universe, the stars, Mother Earth, all of life. The great binding law is really the unconditional love that connects everything, the little blue light of spirit in each of us. And for all living things created, the Creator gave us original instructions about how they were to go about living. For each people, the Creator placed all things necessary to support and nourish our lives, and an original instruction about how we were to go about on Mother Earth as a human being. Each people was given its language, its teachings, its way of life, and its ceremonies. Just as the pine tree never tries to convince the oak tree to change its ways, so it is in following the great binding law that the original people never tell each other what they should do or what they should believe. We welcome each other, each following our special ways, and we live by the 7 sacred laws and the 7 animals that teach us this. First of all is respect, is love, as courage, honesty, wisdom, humility, and truth. And that is what guides us every day in word and in living. and natural laws are reciprocal laws that apply to every living being in the universe, and nature operates on cycles. It is the circle. My final comment is from our great spiritual leader, the keeper of our most sacred pipe, Arvo Lookinghorst, and he said, "There will come a time when a sign would show us where man's behavior has gone too far in their destructive choices. Our ancestors have shared their message through ceremony. We warned people would not be able to control what they have created. These are now the crossroads. Either be faced with global disasters, earth changes, climate change, sicknesses causing tears from our relatives' eyes, or we can unite spiritually, globally, all nations, all faiths, one prayer. It is time that all people understand Mother Earth is the source of life. She is not a resource." Wopiraya, mitakwe was all my relatives. Thank you very much.
Wow. This is quite wonderful. I feel like we could have done an entire session with each one of you. Thank you so much for such beautiful and meaningful presentations. It reminded me doing these, putting these panels together reminds me, and in the Book of Mormon, there's a prophet by the name of Nephi who is looking at the world, trying to understand it, and God comes to him and says, "Do you not understand that I reveal my will to every nation and to those who are upon the islands of the sea, so that the wisdom of God and the truth of God and the beauty of God is found in all of these religions." And since I teach at a theological university, I am blessed to learn from my students as I've learned from you today. I just can't say how grateful I am for that. Now we have probably about 10 minutes where we can unmute ourselves, and just I'd just like for the four of us to have a brief conversation. You can ask questions of one another. You can say things that might come to you, but we have about 10 minutes to just share ideas before we close. So please just unmute yourselves and just talk to one another, and I'll try to listen in.
I think for my part, I'm very touched by Sister Catherine mentioning about that nature is actually speaking to us, and sometimes we kind of like ignore it or don't understand it. I mean, I share that the same teaching also from the Islamic traditions, that we supposed to listen to nature, because nature is always speaking with us, and everything it's alive. Like even the mountain is a living thing. That that we fail as like what I call modern human society right now. We kind of like disconnect ourselves to nature, that the othering, like us as human and nature is the others, that we don't see this, like Gopal said, as relatives, that we don't see that as relatives. That's why we are on this mess at the moment. So I see, like from our just presentation, from Gopal, from Sister Catherine, I see like the thread, the common thread, that we can come together. And for me, like the blessing in disguise of all this ecological disaster, that all of the different faiths and tradition, we can have our differences, but when we talk about protecting the planet, like for the future generation and for all living beings, then we all agreed upon. So I see that, like the common message from just the three of us here today.
Thank you very much for those comments. I'm quickly reading the messaging in the chat box, because there are questions being raised, and I want to attempt to answer some of them. When we talk about we are inclusive of even myself. We as in all of us, we as in it's not man or woman, it's all of humanity. And understanding the damage that we have contributed to and have participated in, and the fact that we are responsible for doing what we need to do to heal the earth and to heal for the sake of the future moving forward. Like I said, 40 years ago, I didn't have to purchase water. Today, we only drink water that we pay for. Whoever heard of that? Water was never created to be bought. Or the fact that my grandmother told me 40 years ago also that someday rivers would run backwards. I couldn't fathom that. I see it now in the hydroelectric projects where the natural arteries of Mother Earth are blocked and diverted, and therefore she's unable to cleanse herself. It's happening around the world. The massive fires we've seen, the volcanoes that are happening, we all have contributed to that by allowing it to happen, whether it be by supporting our member of parliament or those that are in offices of elected positions. We in some way have contributed to that. Now, if a change is going to happen, we individually have to contribute to that change in order for it to happen. We can't abstain from our responsibility. That is why we are here. We're all human, we're individuals that have to contribute to the well-being of, again, like I said, ourselves, our families, communities, but also the earth and the greater community. Because if we're damaging one, we're damaging, it's a domino effect. We're damaging all the rest. And so I'm attempting to answer at least one question that's coming up in the chat box. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
I think one thing I'd like to pick up is two things that both of you said, Catherine and Nana, which I'm trying to tie together with, is around being in rhythm and in connection with the earth, but recognizing that the future of humanity is moving to the cities. And like there's an inherent tension in that, because city urban living is inherently disconnected from nature, disconnected from natural rhythms, right? We don't see the food that we eat. We don't know where the water we're drinking from comes from, and so like that, I think, there's this challenge of educating people to understand the magnitude of the crisis and to try and live in a conscious, mindful way so they're not being harmful. But when the actual infrastructures or the places that we're living in are inherently disconnecting and are made to disconnect us from the rhythms of the earth, how to square that circle, I think, is a really major challenge going forward. And I know, Nana, you're doing work on that. And I think that's what's really beautiful about this work is never static. It's always dynamic. We have the wisdom, we have the traditions, we have the values and the principles, but we always have to renew them and apply them to different contexts, to different peoples and cultures of the world. And I think that urbanization of the world, which is going to happen rapidly over the next decade or two, is going to provide extreme challenges due to the stresses of climate change and biodiversity loss. And so that, I'm fascinated by that. I'm also terrified by that prospect, to be honest with you. But I think that is something that really needs to be lifted up more and more, is that tension which we're going to be seeing increasingly over the years.
Recently, we had a discussion with Dr. David Suzuki and others regarding the current state of land, also our ways of knowing, or what we call our ancient indigenous knowledge, and how it's connected to land. And that although governments have said that indigenous knowledge should be at the forefront, especially in Canada and North America, at addressing climate change, really the politics don't align with the truth of our indigenous knowledge. And so what it requires is politicians to set aside their party mantras, their party positions, and actually look at being human beings themselves to address what needs to change. And until that happens, and until the party politics is set aside, the changes that we speak of, like the Paris Accord, the climate accords that have been agreed to, or that are still floating around and no one's really doing anything about it, or not trying very hard, until an understanding is reached about all of that, we will continue to struggle in pockets of people attempting to address climate change and where things are at with our earth. It is much more of a crisis state than people realize, because it's not affecting them personally. They don't see it yet. I love that there are communities and countries stating that they are going to move to electric vehicles by the year in 20 years' time. I think of that and I think back where I was 20 years ago, and I think of my grandchildren. My youngest grandchild will be 27, 28 years old then. And what kind of world is she going to have? So though that time, and when we reach this age, we realize that time goes by so quickly, that a decade is such a minuscule amount of time to affect the change we need to happen compared to the damage we've created and what we need to do. We need only look at COVID and what happened when man and the world came to a standstill, how things cleaned, how waters became clean, how animals started grazing again, how the air changed, how everything changed because man was brought to his knees. And that we need to have a serious talk and discussion and thought about. That is what will create change, when we acknowledge that without our participation, without driving every day somewhere, without having to be somewhere, without having to fly across the ocean, all of that stuff, that nature, Earth will always survive. She will rejuvenate. Man doesn't have that capability. We can't cut off our legs and think we're going to grow them back again, just like animals can, or cut off their tails and they grow back again. So nature is showing us the answers. We just need to pay attention. Thank you.
I have the sense that everyone here and everyone listening would love this conversation to go on and on. It is really so helpful and so meaningful. It also reminds me of something Emerson said, and when I think about the great wisdom of these traditions that you represent and that others who've participated before do. Emerson said, "I've never met anyone who wasn't my superior in some particular." And this wisdom that you all bring from these very rich traditions that have been around for thousands of years and that have blessed the world and have blessed humanity, it gives me hope that William Faulkner in his Nobel acceptance speech, in his writing, in his novels, he talked about human beings enduring. But he changed that in the Nobel acceptance speech. He talked about that we would prevail. And it is the wisdom of all of these traditions that provide that hope. So I want to thank each and all of you for what you've contributed to this discussion. I'm going to try and summarize a few things, and then we'll meet in the after chat after I turn time over to Jim, and after I close with a few remarks. I began with this essay of Barry Lopez's that has been so kind of meaningful. And in that essay I referred to at the beginning, Lopez writes about the desecration of the birds and their nesting places throughout that beautiful city in the New World. The image of Cortez burning the aviaries, and he said is not for me simply an image of a kind of destructive madness that lies at the heart of imperialistic conquests. It is also a symbol of the long-term failure of Western civilization to recognize the intrinsic worth of the American landscape and its potential value to human societies that have come to be at odds with the natural world. And while English, French, and Spanish explorers were cruising the eastern shores of America, dreaming of feudal fiefdoms of gold and political advantage, the continent itself was already occupied in a complex way by more than 500 different cultures, as Catherine so beautifully illustrated. And Lopez says each one of these cultures regarded itself as living
in some kind of enlightened intimacy with the land. It's so typical of Barry's writing, enlightened intimacy. We have lost both that enlightenment and that intimacy. But Lopez believed that we can learn it again, not only from indigenous peoples, but also from the animals as well. He writes, "It is possible to imagine that on the far side of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, where we are now, we can recover the threads of an earlier wisdom. I think of the animals," he said, "because of the myriad ways in which they have helped us since we first regarded each other differently." Returning to that tragic day in 1521, Lopez writes, "Cortez's soldiers on their walks through the gleaming gardens of Tenochtitlan would have been as struck by the flight path of songbirds as we are today. In neither a horizontal nor a vertical dimension do these pathways match the line and scale of human creation within which the birds dwell." He then follows with this beautiful line. "The corridors the birds travel are curved around some other universe. It is the bird's independence from predictable patterns of human design that draws us to them. In the bird's separate but related universe, we're able to sense hope for ourselves. It is against a backdrop of the familiar that we recognize with astonishment a new pattern." Lopez would have been familiar with the rich and universal symbolic association with birds. In the tapestry of human cultures, they represent not only spirits and angels and even gods, but they also represent the human soul in our highest aspirations, our most glorious imaginings. For Hindus, the birds represent, among other things, the higher states of being. The language of birds of which the Quran speaks are the words of angels, the messengers that come to us from above and from throughout the world, including from nature and from the animals. And in the symphony of indigenous mythologies, they represent many things, including messages between humans that we've participated in so beautifully here today, and the spirit world, which comes to us with that kind of wisdom. As we think about what we've listened to today and these beautiful and meaningful words and images, as we think about that time 5 centuries ago when the devastation we are realizing today began with that destruction of those birds and the nests in that beautiful city and its people. As we think about the birds, and we look up to see them flying in the sky, lifting from rivers and ponds and lakes and oceans. May we look up and listen to them and find again our lost enlightened intimacy with nature. And in so doing, imagine and then make a better world. And like Barry Lopez, may we be ever rebuilding, repairing, and replanting. Thank you. The time now back to you, Jim.
Thank you, Bob. Those words by Barry Lopez are sublime. I hadn't quite taken him in until today, so you've provided all of us with a great gift of a rarefied mind that we can read and contemplate. So thank you for that. You know, and I love that quote from Emerson that he never met anybody who wasn't superior to him in some way. And I felt like that today, and almost every day on Humanity Rising, I'm encountering people that are superior to me in some way. And it's a delicious feeling to always be sitting at someone's feet, receiving wisdom or insight. You know, Nana, your great line today for me is that nature is the Quran. I mean, that's such a profound notion. It's bigger than a book. It's the world, and the world is the Quran. And Gopal, your lines from the Veda, that the Creator, maybe he knows, maybe he does not know what creation is all about and where it began and how it began and where it's going. I mean, that's a vast thought, because we usually think of the Creator as understanding all, omniscient and omnipotent, and to think maybe even the Creator doesn't know the totality of the mystery of being is just a vast thought that I just want to acknowledge. And Catherine, your sublime wisdom from the earth, that there is no boundaries, that you refuse to accept boundaries. I just love that when someone like you refuses to accept the boundaries that put us all in bondage. Boundaries are bondage. And we need to be breaking out of that across cultures and around the world, and embrace all of creation, both the human and the non-human, all sentient being, which is everything, as one singularity in which we find ourselves. So I find myself humbled by today's session. I find myself deeply grateful to have met four superior minds. So thank you for gracing us today. And then on Monday, we're going to be back, same time, same station, delving more deeply into the issue of race. We're coming up to the first anniversary of the killing of George Floyd last May 25th, that somehow ignited a global consciousness about race that led to the most massive outpouring of protests, both in terms of numbers of protests and total numbers of people involved in protests, than any protests in the history of the world. It came in the middle of the pandemic around race. And that's another boundary that binds us, imprisons us. And we're turning to Dr. Ferguson, who is going to lead us in a very deep contemplation of race and how we can actively embrace the other at a time such as ours, where racial disparities are tearing nations like the United States apart. So that'll be on Monday on Humanity Rising. So thank you, everyone. This has been a sublime session. Bob, I love what you're bringing to our community, and hope that we can see you again soon. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you again Monday on Humanity Rising. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wopia.